Spoilers, 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 spoilers. If you do not want spoilers for Game of Thrones Season 8, Episode 3, The Long Night, then please leave now. But if you're sticking with me, then I assume you've seen it. I don't really know where to begin talking about this episode. Dear God, there's so much that works with this episode. And I kind of think of a more appropriate place to start in the beginning because I suppose that'll just help me to keep my review in a somewhat coherent and structured fashion. So we open with some additional calm moments before the battle. Very different from the previous episode's calm before the storm or moments, as these ones are literally right before shit is about to start going down. We spend quite a bit of time showing lots of characters right at the front lines. Brienne, Podrick, Ed, Tormund, Sam, Grey Worm, all these people right at the front of the battle. I was really surprised to see Melisandre come back right in the nick of time, and she does three things in this episode. Firstly, she lights the Dothraki blades on fire, which is a really awesome visual. We see all those blades catch fire, and then Jorah and the Dothraki make the charge, and we see a view from Jon and Daenerys' position, which is it's just such a spectacle. But, you know, then we go back to the ground, and we stay there quite a bit, and the fire starts to get smaller and less bright. And pretty soon, all of the flames have been extinguished, and there's just that's just a really good use of visual storytelling because of how the light goes against the dark and how it just gets extinguished so quickly. So that was quite clever, and I thought that they pulled that off nicely. It takes a bit, but sooner than later we see horses and Dothraki running back. We even see that Jorah made it out okay, but when I initially watched this for a moment, I really thought that Jorah had been turned into a white, and it turned out that he was fine, but I really thought, I was like, oh no, Jorah's a white. That was up to a bad start. But yeah, he was fine. So after this, there's a lot of battle moments, and the army of the dead come charging and attack everybody, and it's scary as hell, and there's parts of the episode that are just total chaos, and it's hard to tell what's exactly happening, and if this was the whole episode, it could have been really annoying or dull, but it's a really small part, and it works quite well for the intensity and chaos that they wanted to portray. So we lose Ed in this one just after he saves Sam, which was an unfortunate death. He's a nice guy, so that was sad to watch, but, you know, he was one of the lesser characters to have been taken out in this one, but ultimately, it was just a shame to see him go. Also, we see that Daenerys makes the call to not stick to the plan, but to instead take the dragons and try to help in killing the army of the dead. This basically is prompted because she sees the majority of her Dothraki just get wiped off the board by the army of the dead, and she's not the kind of person who can stand by while that happens. And Jon ultimately joins her, and the two of them try to do what they can. So already, this early in the episode, the plan has changed basically as soon as it was possible to. So they are able to help out with their dragons for a bit, but before too long that changes. I thought it was really smart how they basically nerfed the dragons for this episode, because the dragons are basically their biggest asset. They could, in theory, just fly overhead and burn loads of the undead, but the way that they had the Night King and the Army of the Dead as winter, basically bringing in a winter storm, I thought that was just a really good idea, and it helped in making things more difficult for our protagonists, who were already going to have a difficult time in this battle. Also, there's a great part where Davos tries to give the signal to light the trenches, but because of the winter storm that the White Walkers brought with them, that's just not possible. Daenerys can't see the signal, and they send people out with torches. They try using arrows, but none of that works, so ultimately Melisandre helps to light the trenches, which is probably the second most important thing that she does in this episode, although I will get back to talking about her most important thing later. We'll get to that, but that was a really good visual, and the scale of that was truly spectacular, and I thought that was just very well handled. So we get a scene in the crypts where we see Tyrion being bitter because he's underground and he wants to help, but Sansa brings him back down to reality by telling him the truth. If he was up there, he would be dead. And they have some good dialogue discussing their marriage, and that was interesting to see and very unexpected. Of course, Missandei has to interject and stick up for her queen, which I don't blame her for. I mean, she sticks up for who she cares about. That's a good thing. So yeah, I did like that moment and that brief little scene. After this, we spend a brief amount of time with Theon and Bran. They've got a little dialogue. I liked seeing that. This leads into Bran taking some crows to the Night King. And I'm not entirely sure how to interpret this scene because the way I see it, there's a couple of ways to look at it. Bran might just want to get an idea of where the Night King is at currently, or he might actually be provoking him to come get him. And honestly, I'm not sure which. And there's this part where the Night King reaches out his hand, which could also be a couple of things. I think he's either reaching it in the direction of Bran to basically see where he's at, or he might possibly be giving a command for the Whites to do what they do next, although I don't think there's any evidence to necessarily suggest that he can do that. So yeah, I'm not quite sure, but let me know what you interpret about that scene, because I'd love to know what you think, because I'm not really sure what to think. So yeah, we see a White walk into the flames, and then another White, and then another, and before too long it becomes pretty clear that they're creating a bridge across the trench and making a path for the other Whites to get across, which is delightfully terrifying. So this is about the point when Jon sees the Night King, and Jon is a character who has some very real history with the Night King. From that moment at Hardhome, the first time he saw him, that part beyond the wall, and last season, and this is the first time that they see each other since that moment beyond the wall. So this moment's pretty significant, and Jon does what you would expect of him, and he decides to go after the Night King, which I thought really made sense for Jon. But ultimately, I'm not entirely sure that it was a good call. So this is about the point when the Whites are past the barricade, and they're starting to actually climb over the wall by piling themselves on top of each other. We get some intense fighting. There's this one shot that I really like with Brienne and Jaime fighting, and it doesn't take very long before they're over the wall and actually inside of Winterfell. In fact, it's about the 40-minute mark when they actually start to get over the wall and move on to the next line of defense. So we do have the scene with the giant and little Lyanna Mormont, which was really sad. That death hurt. She's so small, and you can hear her just getting crushed, but she's got that badass moment where she takes the giant down, which that's pretty great. I mean, her character was rather insignificant, but I enjoyed her presence on screen. We also spend a little bit of time with Daenerys and Jon in the sky, and this is a pretty intense fight with the Night King. It's just got a lot of grand scale to it, and while we do also at the same time stay up close, and that keeps it intense. It's hard to describe. It's just really well done, and there's a couple of wide shots in the sky up above the clouds that just look absolutely gorgeous, and I honestly was taken aback a little, because we're in this intense fight and we just see these beautiful shots that it's just surprised me. I thought it was beautiful. There's this brief scene in the crypts with Sansa and the rest where they can hear people banging and yelling from outside. They're begging to be let in, but pretty soon after it starts, the screaming stops, meaning that they're all dead. In truth, everyone in the crypts doesn't actually know how many people are left alive, so those could have been the last living, soldiers, the last line of defense, but they just wouldn't know, and that's pretty terrifying. So we see Theon and his crew defending Bran in the Godswood, showing just how far these Whites have gotten to. I mean, at this point, they're basically everywhere, and there's still another 25 minutes left in the episode. It's super fucking crazy. The Night King comes in, and his dragon gets one chance to breathe fire on Winterfell. But then Jon comes in, and there's this great fight between these giant dragons. It's just so fucking insane. And then Daenerys comes in, and God, it's so crazy. And one thing that I really liked was how they were able to make the separate dragons identifiable, because the Night King's dragon Viserion has lots of holes in its wings, and Jon's Rhaegal just doesn't. So you can pretty quickly, with each new shot, see which one is which, and I like that. Also, the blue flames really helped as well. They just do a good job of showing you what's going on in this battle. We see Jon's dragon Rhaegal get torn up a bit, and we see the Night King's dragon Viserion's mouth and throat get torn up, and we see Jon lose his coat, and the Night King ultimately tries to throw a spear, but, fails. And it's just a great scene, which ultimately ends with Dany saving Rhaegal and Jon, and the Night King falling from his dragon, and of course he survived because he's pretty close to invincible, and that would be a pretty lame way to exit the show and to die. It's just falling to his death. I mean, really. So Rhaegal comes to the ground, and then Jon gets thrown from his dragon. Then, of course, Dany comes to the ground and has her badass moment when she tries to kill the Night King with dragon fire, which was a great moment. But, of course, it didn't work. It just couldn't have worked, because there was no way that that was the way that it ended. There was just too much left in this episode. So as great of a moment as that was, I, of course, didn't buy it for a second. And, you know, it was a great moment. It was great. But yeah, the scene is fantastic, and the little evil smile that the Night King had after surviving that was genuinely creepy. And of course, he tries again and fails to take out Drogon. So that whole section of the episode was handled really well. And this part that follows next was so good. Jesus, Jon chases after the Night King. He tries to end the Great War. He doesn't do anything stupid like yelling. He just tries to be sneaky enough where he can actually get up to the Night King while also not being terribly slow. And naturally, the Night King hears him and he turns around and Jon stops for a bit. Like, damn, we're doing this. Are we? And the Night King makes this move, and Jesus Christ, he makes his move. And he slowly lifts up his arms, recreating what he did in Hardhome, and all of the dead start to become undead, and Jon is surrounded by so many undead bodies, and this moment is just such a huge oh fuck moment. Jon tries to run, but he can't get to the Night King fast enough. Dead people just start to stand up all around him, and he's completely surrounded, and the dead start to come after him, and he really looks super fucked. So yeah, I thought they did a really good job of playing that moment. It was well done. So then we see all the dead rise everywhere. We see Lyanna as a white, we see Ed as a white, and all 12 White Walkers make their big, badass entrance into Winterfell. Thinking about it, it actually makes sense that they come in after their army already has, because you can kill those guys with Dragonglass, which means that if they charged in first, they would have died pretty quickly. So I imagine that at the end of the last episode, we see them all in front, but then when the Dothraki charge out to them, then they send their whites out in front of them to destroy the Dothraki army. Although the Dothraki didn't actually have Dragonglass weapons, so they would have just been just fine with them. But I imagine, you know, it's a safety thing. They stay back, they are fine. You know, I imagine they don't actually do a heck of a lot of fighting. Although we did see that one White Walker fight Jon in Hardhome, I'm just getting seriously derailed, but yeah, that's just something to think about. So we go underground to the crypts, where we see that when the Night King raised his army, it also worked on the dead that they had buried in the crypts over the past God knows how long, which was something that I had seen theorized around on Twitter a lot, but not something that I had ever thought about myself personally. So otherwise, I would have been really surprised by that, and ultimately I did think that was a neat little development. So up in the Godswood, we see Theon and his men fighting for their lives. They're struggling, they're losing people, the dead are coming quickly, it's crazy. We cut back to Jon and see that he's doing alright. In fact, there seemed to be significantly less of the whites around him than there were before, and that was about 2 minutes ago. And this is one of a couple of minor complaints that I have about this episode, where it just felt like they pushed believability a bit too far for my liking. I mean, realistically, Jon would already have been killed due to the amount of whites there, but that's just a minor complaint due to what happens next, which is, of course, that Daenerys comes in from above with Drogon and saves him for the second time, which did feel like the only realistic way for him to get out of that situation alive. Also, that was just cool to see. I mean, the music comes in and Drogon saves the day, and it's just really awesome to watch that happen. I just love seeing dragons be dragons, and it's just a good moment. So then, Jon runs off to kill the Night King, and after Dany has landed on the ground, the undead have started to climb onto Drogon, and Drogon, he starts to shake them all off, but it doesn't work all that well, and in the process of doing this, he shakes his mother off of his back, and Daenerys ultimately, falls to the ground, and he has to take flight to get all of the whites off of him, which is just a really well realized visual, and I just thought that was handled well. It's just something I'm not used to seeing, this big dragon shaking off these basically little ants off of its body. It's just such an interesting image. It's hard to really describe it, but this is what it looks like. So then, of course, a white comes after Danny, who gets saved by Jorah, as one would expect. I liked how that had a moment earlier, which shows Jorah looking at what's going on, setting up that he would come over here to save the day, because in the moment, of course, I did expect Jorah to save the day, and ultimately, it is super fitting that he does come in and save the woman that he loves. And the focus shifts back to Jon, who's headed towards the Night King. He goes inside of Winterfell, killing whites along the way. And as he's headed to the Godswood, he sees all of these people that he knows and, cares for, fighting for their lives. And he even sees Sam on the ground, nearly getting killed. And oh my god, this scene is so good, because you can just feel how badly Jon wants to help these people, but he knows that he has to kill the Night King, and he walks past his friends. Well, I say walks, I mean runs past his friends as much as he can run, to do what he knows he has to do, even if it hurts him. I just love this scene so much, and I love this moment so much, where he's just, he does what's hard. He makes the hard decision here. Also, there's a nice part with Jon in a hallway, which has a cool 25-second shot of him working his way through, killing whites, and closing the door behind him. That was just a neat shot, although not as impressive as, say, the shot in Hardhome or Battle of the Bastards. So things are getting worse and more intense for Theon and Bran. They run out of arrows, and now Theon's using a spear, and basically everyone else is dead. Jorah's protecting Dany, and we see her pick up a weapon and try to help, which is cool. And if I recall correctly, this is the first time that we've ever seen her wielding a weapon, and probably the first time she ever has. And that's not something she's ever done before, so that's just cool to see. I mean, she's put in a situation that she's not used to, where she has to adapt and, fight for her life. Although she is, being protected by Jorah. She wouldn't make it out of this if it wasn't for Jorah, because she is not an experienced fighter. Although I have one nitpick that bothers me about this part of the episode, and that's that right before it cuts away, we see 5 of these whites charging Daenerys, and there's just no way that she could have killed them all herself without any experience. And Jorah was occupied at the moment, if you see, facing the other way, and she didn't seem to be injured later. And previously, I thought that it was 3, but upon closer inspection, it was definitely 5. So yeah, that's just a little thing, but it does bother me a bit. But let's take a step back. There's one thing that I haven't been talking about for this whole review, and that one thing is a person, and her name is Arya. Early on, there was a beat when Arya and Melisandre lock eyes, and that's a beat that becomes more interesting with repeat viewings. There's a small moment where Arya sends Sansa down to the crypts with a dragonglass weapon, which is worth mentioning, although there's not a lot to say about it right here. It's just a good moment between these two sisters. It's a little bit before we see Arya again after this, but when we do, it's really good. She enters the screen, and this really badass music plays, and we just spend some time getting to see one of the greatest fighters here just kicking ass for a couple of minutes. But it's clearly not easy for her, and we see her continue to fight, and things just continue to get harder and harder. She can't fight off the whole army of the dead by herself, and this becomes very evident. And she just gets more and more beaten down as more and more White Walkers, I say White Walkers, I mean whites, attack her. Also, I really like the weapon she has, which she's able to take into these small places and use efficiently. And this, unfortunately, gets lost pretty quickly among the chaos of everything that's going on. And it gets to this moment when she's on a rooftop and she's just so overwhelmed by the situation. And then what's been going on with the Hound ties in with this, because he's already given up. He stopped fighting, and he says that they can't beat death. And Beric Dondarrion looks up to Arya and says, "Tell her that," which is an even better line rewatching the episode and seeing the added meaning that the end of the episode brings to this. So we spend a few minutes with Arya in the library, which is a really good scene filled with tension, and by this point she's already been overwhelmed and the battle is getting to be too much even for her. And there's a really good moment where Arya silently expressed her frustration at the situation, which I thought was a really nice touch. Also, I like how the scene plays out because the way it's shot and with how quiet it was, I kept expecting that the camera would move this way or that way, and then we would just get jump scared by one of the undead. And that's just not how it played out, because there's only one moment in that whole scene where she actually gets encountered by a wight, and that's when she stabs it through its mouth and kills it. So I really like that, and this leads into the part where she's running, and she's being chased by loads of the undead, and it's just a super fucking intense moment. So the Hound and Beric are in the castle going to help Arya, and pretty soon they encounter her. And this is the part where Beric throws his flaming sword and kills the wight that's on top of Arya at that moment, which, as it turns out, is a pretty important moment in the episode. So they manage to make it somewhere where they can barricade themselves in, and Beric Dondarrion just doesn't make it. He's been too damaged by the wights, so he dies, which, wasn't terribly surprising because he's a character I thought had a high chance of not making it out of this episode alive. But, he died. It's worth mentioning. But then we get to what I really want to talk about. Melisandre shows up, and she says that the Lord brought back Beric for a purpose, and that now that purpose has been served. Now, by this point in the season, I had already been thinking about who was going to kill the Night King, and I had considered Arya as a top candidate because of the weapon she had made for her, although that ultimately was less instrumental than I actually expected it to be. So my immediate thought when she said that was that, yeah, Arya was going to be the one, or at the very least, someone that tried. But then Melisandre said that line about the blue eyes, which again made me really excited because it added to the evidence that Arya would try to kill the Night King. And then we see Arya walk off very purposefully, which is just a fantastic moment that I love watching. And I love watching it even more knowing how the episode ends, because it just makes that moment so much more lovable, I guess. It's just like really exciting, knowing where the story goes from that moment makes that moment even better. If you ask me, this is possibly the single most important thing Melisandre has ever done. Arya was in shock. She was overwhelmed. She wasn't calm and collected as the fighter that we had seen her be in the past. And this battle was beginning to be too much for her. But then Melisandre focuses her, and she gives her the motivation that she needs. And that ultimately, wound up being vital to how this episode ends. And I say that as if this isn't a spoiler review, but it is, so I can say how this episode ends. But whatever. Although you could argue that her, resurrecting Jon was more important. But I think I've yet to see a reason to believe that would be true. Although I'm open to being proved wrong by that. If you think that her giving Arya that motivation was less important than resurrecting Jon, then by all means, tell me why in the comments below. I'm happy to have a conversation about that. I haven't thought all that much about it. I mean, Jon did a bunch of important stuff, but I'm not here to get sidetracked about that. If that's a conversation you want to have, I'll have it down below. So I loved all this stuff with Arya, and I already thought that it was really good, but knowing how the episode concludes just makes it that much better to rewatch. And I think just all this stuff is so good, and I just love this part of the episode. So jumping back towards the end of the episode, oh my god. We go down into the crypts, and we spend a little bit of time with Tyrion and Sansa. And this scene, oh my god, it's so beautiful. Just the two of them sharing this moment together and knowing very well that this could be the end. It just gets to me, And the second she takes out that dragonglass knife that Arya gave to her, and she looks at him, and he looks at her, and this moment, right when the piano kicks in and the song titled The Night King plays, this entire sequence was absolutely phenomenal, and easily the best part of the entire episode for me. Also, the song The Night King is possibly my favorite piece of Ramin Djawadi's music to date. Although, don't hold me to that, because he's written an insurmountable amount of incredible music, so it's possible that I'll change my mind later. The music, it just fits so perfectly with every single beat of what's going on in this episode. And because it is only the second piano moment in the entire show, it feels really special, just like it did in The Winds of Winter with the song Light of the Seven. That was a really special moment, and it was a really insane and amazing moment too. These piano numbers, man, they're so good. And I should take a second here just to say the music throughout the entire episode was fantastic. This just stands out because it is such a large piece, and so much attention is given to it in the episode because there is very little dialogue and lots of the sounds are muted. And I just love the song so much. That's why I'm bringing special attention to this, because it just creates such a special moment, and it's my favorite part of the episode. So I have to bring this up. But just know all of the music across the board was great. So the cut from Tyrion exhaling into the muted sound of the battle above, moving into Jon's scene as we see him trying and failing repeatedly to get past Viserion, was a brilliant piece of editing, and I loved that moment when I first watched it. I was like, wow, that's just, God, it's such good editing. I just loved it. So yeah, Jon tries and tries to get to the Godswood in time to fight the Night King, but he fails every single time. We see Jorah defending the woman he loves, his queen, and getting more and more damaged, but continuing to defend Daenerys, the woman that he loves, who just couldn't love him back. We see Sansa and Tyrion down in the crypts of Winterfell, with Varys and the rest of them not fighting, but just hoping not to be seen, as the people around them are being murdered. Everyone sent to the crypts are people who can't really defend themselves all that well. So yeah, I just thought that was great. We get more shots of some characters we love inside of Winterfell, on top of piles of body, pushed against walls, facing off against the dead, and just fighting for their lives. We see Sam on the ground, just breaking down, crying. Then it happens. The Night King enters the Godswood, where Bran has been waiting this entire time. And his whole entrance is fantastic. This whole sequence is presented in slow motion, and that combined with the music and everything else going on really adds to the feel of the sequence, and just the feeling of desperation and the complete lack of hope with all of these characters in such dire situations. And Theon, the fucking champ, he fights right up until the bitter end. He is relentless, and he does not let down for a single second. And Bran has that line where he says, "Theon, you're a good man." And oh my god, that one, it just gets me right in the feels. And then Theon, knowing full well that this is it for him, he goes out like a boss, charging at the Night King and ultimately failing to kill him and losing his own life. This is the end to his story. He dies protecting Bran, which I think is really fitting, and that was really well done. Theon has a great story, and this was basically the perfect way to end his story, so I'm really happy with how that happened. So the Night King continues to walk up to Bran, and this is intercut with Jon's failed attempts to get past the dragon. And this whole time, as the Night King was walking up to Bran, I was just pleading for Arya to come in, because I remembered that they had set up prior in this episode that, you know, she would try to kill the Night King, and I was really, really hoping that she would come in and save the day. And during this time, we also see Jorah get stabbed in a blow that really looked bad. And that blow was basically the one that confirmed he was not going to make it. So that hurt, and that was something else to worry about amid all this other stuff that's already going on. And oh my god, this was just such a crazy experience for me to watch, not knowing for sure what was going to happen. I just so badly wanted Arya to come in there and save everything. But I didn't know for sure if she was going to do it. I didn't know if she was going to save Bran, or if he was just going to die. At this point, Jon is just way too far away to make it. And he basically just says, screw it. And he stands up and he yells at the dragon, Viserion. And he's just tired of hiding. And he's, I guess, kind of given up. He's not able to be where he needs to be, and he stands up and he faces the dragon, which is a pretty scary thing to do. And then, as the Night King gets ever closer to Bran, we see one of the White Walker's hair move as he looks to his right. And at this point, I was like, yes! And then we see him go for his sword. We see the Night King reach for his sword. And then, from the back of the shot, from the back of the fucking shot, we see Arya leap at him, and I was like, yes! But then, he grabbed her by the fucking throat, and I was like, no! You know? And for a couple of seconds, I genuinely believed with every fiber of my being that my favorite character was dead, that she was not going to make it out of the situation alive. I didn't think she stood a chance at all. But then she drops a dagger, which worried me for a brief moment. But then I realized what was going on, and it cuts to that shot underneath where she grabs it. And I just, yes! And then she does it. She stabs the Night King right in the heart, killing him for good. And what a fantastic explosion that was of the Night King. He's destroyed, and Arya lands on the ground, having completed her mission, with all of the other White Walkers that he has created immediately following suit and exploding themselves. And all of the Whites that any of them have, all of the Whites that have been turned into undead, they just collapsed. And the remaining survivors are all safe. I mean, holy shit. The experience that I had watching the final moments of this fantastic sequence was just amazing and unexpected. And I had such whiplash from going from such a yes moment to such another big yes moment, right into a no moment, and then back again into a yes moment. And I'm describing these moments in this particular way just simply because that was actually what I yelled during those moments, watching it for the first time. And that was just what I felt, and what I felt was really crazy, and it was a pretty special moment for me. And I have to say, when she stabbed the knife into the Night King, that was just a moment of satisfaction. I was unbelievably relieved to see him explode, and see all of the White Walkers and all of the Whites fall down and explode. And it was just such a fantastic moment to see play out, and I absolutely loved it, and I just couldn't believe that it had happened, you know? I really just can't express how much I love this moment. It is one of my absolute favorite moments in Game of Thrones. It really is, and I'm so thankful for this episode. Of course, even with that amazing ending, things aren't all happy. We see lots of people who are now safe, but we also have this fantastic scene with Jorah and Dany that I just loved. It's really tragic and beautiful seeing Jorah die defending the woman he loved, and seeing how heartbroken she is when he perishes. She may never have loved him in that way, but he meant a great deal to her, and both of these actors did a phenomenal job in that moment, and these characters have such a history together, and I think this is the perfect way for Jorah to go, and I think that this is how he would choose to go if he could. So the final scene of the entire episode is of Melisandre, having completed her purpose, choosing to walk off into the snowy field, throw down her necklace that was making her look young, and just die. I mean, yeah, that's it. That's all for her. She had done all she needed to. She'd served her purpose. And I thought that was kind of an oddly fitting way to have that character exit the show. It worked for me. And frankly, I'm glad to have her gone, simply because she was a wild card. And now that she's not a part of the picture anymore, it's just good to know that. And it was an interesting choice to end the episode there, given everything that had come before in this episode. But that doesn't mean it was a bad choice. I guess she showed up at the beginning of this episode, and she said, I'll be dead before the dawn, and then the dawn comes and she dies. So, yeah, it worked for me. I thought it was good. So, having gone through basically the majority of the episode, I do have a couple more things that I want to fit in about this episode. I think the acting across the board is great. It doesn't feel like anybody's not trying their hardest. I mean, that's really always the case for Game of Thrones. Everyone does a great job, but the same can be said here. In fact, in all departments, this episode really pulled everything off excellently. The directing was solid. There's some moments where it's just done really well, and for the most part, the director, who also did Battle of the Bastards and Hardhome, is really good at keeping you in the moment that you're supposed to be focused on, and keeping the intensity of everything that's going on really high. So yeah, I thought the direction was great. There were a lot of people complaining about this episode being too dark, and if you legitimately couldn't see what was going on, then that is a reasonable enough complaint. But I don't share it. I thought that they did a good job of showing what was going on in the episode during the night, at least as much as they wanted to show. For the most part, I could tell what was going on all the time, except for a couple of parts early on where they chose to show the true chaos of the battle, and there was just fighting, and I really could barely tell what was going on, which was, an interesting thing to do for a very small portion of the episode, and it worked for me. But had they tried doing this throughout the episode, I think that would have just been a horrible idea. But, they only did it for a very small part where you actually couldn't tell what was going on because it was just so chaotic outside of the walls. And yeah, the rest of it, I could see what was happening, and I could follow what was going on. And yeah, also, that had more to do with the editing and with how many people were on screen, and less to do with the actual darkness of the shots where they were outside and everything was chaotic. So yeah, that's just something that a lot of people have been taking issue with, and I just don't. So yeah, I don't really know what else to say about that. I was able to see what was going on in the episode. It wasn't too dark. I thought they did a good job of that. Besides, Game of Thrones is a dark show by nature, not too dark, but dark. And this episode was set at night, so I really don't have the same complaints that some people had. But if you did, that's fine. You're certainly allowed to have that problem. Also, just the structure of the events of the episode was really well paced, and stuff flowed and went together well. And they managed to keep the battle from getting boring by giving us some good character moments and just keeping the viewer engaged with the different stuff that was going around in different places, how they opened with the Dothraki sequence, and then slowly brought the dead closer and closer to the heart of Winterfell. That was really well done. I had another minor nitpick, and this one is another relatively small one, but the scene when Jon is running through and sees everybody up against the walls or on top of piles of bodies, basically at the very end of fighting. They're pushed back as far as they can go, and then we leave them for about 5 minutes, and the next time we see them, they're basically in the exact same positions, which was another thing that pushed believability just a little too far for my liking. But that's such a minor nitpick, and the thing about all these nitpicks I make is that they're just the tiniest things. They don't legitimately bother me while I'm watching the episode because they're really small. But I do notice them, and I feel that they're worth pointing out, but there's nothing in here that really takes away from my experience of this episode. And this episode is truly an experience. There's so much excellent stuff in this episode that it by far outweighs the couple of little nitpicks that I have. Also, that ties into the whole timeline of the episode, because I mentioned earlier that it's really well paced, which it is, and this is kind of a tricky thing to pace because you've got so many characters and we want to give enough attention to all of them in this episode. So there's parts of the episode that I just don't know for sure, but I imagine might be overlapping. But we're seeing these scenes when we are, because that's how we can see them all. For example, that thing where the characters were basically safe in the same place fighting off the army of the dead for 5 minutes might not have actually been 5 minutes. It might have been 2, or it might have been 4. I don't really know. I'd have to examine the scene a little closer to see how much time it feels like actually passes. And then there's the surreal scene with the Night King in slow motion, which adds to the confusing nature of the timeline, which makes stuff less clear. But I say confusing not in a bad way, because it's only hard to figure out for sure when I stop and think about how the timeline fits together. And by stopping to think about it, I mean stopping to think about it for a little amount of time. Because if I actually stopped and thought about it for a good bit of time, I could probably figure it out. But the fact is I just haven't done that yet. I've only thought about it a little bit. And stopping and really thinking about this timeline is not something that I do while I'm watching the episode. The episode doesn't really give you time to do that. While watching the episode, I'm fully immersed in what they're telling me, and I'm with it for every step of the way. And these, like I said, and I mean, I'm sure I'll have more time to take a closer look at the episode. I mean, I've already seen it 3 times, and I'll definitely see it once or twice more before the next episode. So I'll be able to take a closer look at that timeline in the future, but it's not something that I need to do right now. So yeah, that was just something that I kind of wanted to bring up, even though I don't really have an answer to it or a definitive conclusion about the timeline. It's just something I kind of wanted to discuss about the episode, and I felt I needed to. So yeah, that was that. And talking about balance and respecting all these characters, Jamie, I think, had like less than 10 words in the whole episode. So early on, I kind of felt like he was probably going to make it just because of how little attention was given to his character. And when you've got these many characters, you can only give attention to the ones that really matter, I suppose. That is the wise thing to do. But I did figure out pretty early, oh, he's going to be fine in this episode, because otherwise they would give him more attention. So yeah, the death toll, it ended up being 7. We lost Ed, Liana, Beric, Theon, the Night King, Jorah, and Melisandre. Theon and Jorah hit the hardest, but of course, Liana wasn't easy. The Night King was really satisfying. Ed was sad, but it was one of the easier deaths to take, and one of the most likely ones, as was Beric, although his was great because of the important role that he played. Melisandre was fitting, and surprising because I didn't expect to see her in this episode. So yeah, all the deaths, I think, wound up being good. Yeah, some of them were great, like, you know, the Night King, Jorah, Theon, but all the other ones are just like, oh, these are good deaths. And Liana has a pretty badass exit, I think. And yeah, the death toll was not as big as I expected, but it was 7. So, you know, that's just where we're at with that. And for my money, there were 15 characters of varying stages of importance that survived the episode, although I could be miscounting. And I suppose it is worth having that discussion about whether or not they killed enough people, or if maybe, you know, they didn't kill enough people. And ultimately, while I do think that they did kill enough people, I can't help but feel that this episode could have been even better had they also killed, I'd say, about 3 more, by my reckoning. I think they should have killed one of the minor characters in the crypts to make that turn of events more important, say Gilly or Missandei. And then another one up top, say someone like Podrick or Gendry, as well as a main character, because the impact of a main character death would really help to make this episode stand out even more. So, the way I see it, the candidates for main character death are Sansa, Tyrion, Jaime, Jon, Dany, and Arya. In terms of who that should have been, I don't know, maybe none of them. The thing is, I don't actually know what the writers have planned for these characters, but, you know, if they survived, then it must be something really good. And that's why I'm more confident about saying stuff for these more minor characters, because they're less important and are less likely to have big plans in the future. But this is a topic I will ultimately revisit in the future. Probably when I do like a review of this season, then I'll discuss, did I think they killed enough people in this episode? Did I think they killed enough people across the board? You know, like all that kinds of stuff. Whether or not they're playing for the season, just how good season 8 was as a whole. So I'm going to discuss everything about it. It's going to be a really long video. So yeah, I don't have full knowledge of the season's final 3 episodes, so I can't really say much on this topic right now. That's why I'm going to do it in my review later. Although I will say that killing only 7 people wasn't something that dragged the episode down in any way. That's the important thing. The only reason that I brought up this possibility of more deaths is because I thought that it's possible to maybe make this episode even better than it already is, because this episode's already bloody fantastic. I was kind of expecting us to find out that Jon was resistant to Dragonfire in this episode, but that didn't happen. So I kind of assume that it never will happen, which means that he probably is not resistant to Dragonfire, but I could be wrong. Maybe we'll find out 3 more episodes to go, I suppose. Overall, I thought that this episode was absolutely fantastic. We finally got the long night that was promised, and we got the battle to end all battles. The longest battle put to film. This episode had such scale and was absolutely grand. The intensity of this episode is something few TV shows have ever brought to me before, and probably few will again. This episode had excellent pacing, great direction, spectacular moments, great deaths, and some of the best music I've ever heard, ultimately leading to one of the most satisfying TV moments I've ever experienced. With barely any nitpicks, this episode did just so much right and thoroughly engaged me for 82 straight minutes, bringing me what I found to be an overwhelming amount of incredible television, with so many positives that the almost non-existent flaws are glanced over like, I guess, just like a few needles, in a haystack of amazingness. This is a truly special episode of television that I will be remembering for many nights to come, and I'm going to give The Long Night the perfect rating of 10 out of 10. I was kind of hoping that it would be a while before I finally gave a TV show episode on my channel a 10 out of 10, and that it would be kind of a big deal, But as soon as I decided that I was actually going to review this season of Game of Thrones, because I knew that I had to, I knew that wasn't a possibility. This show rarely lets me down, and unsurprisingly, it produced yet again one of my favorite television episodes, and I really thought that this episode was incredible. So yeah, that I guess dream, not really a dream, but that thought of like, oh, eventually, maybe in a couple years, I'll review an episode and it'll get 10 stars, and it'll be like, whoa, this is the first thing I've ever reviewed that's gotten 10 stars. But you know what? When you talk Game of Thrones, 10 stars it's just what happens sometimes, So I did actually try with this one to address issues that some other people have had with this episode, so that I could basically either explain why I didn't have them, or why I don't think that they are that valid. Like, I don't think wanting Jon to kill the Night King is a valid complaint against the episode. If you were invested in that and disappointed that it didn't happen that way, then that's totally fine. But the show has been doing stuff like that since the beginning, so that really comes as no surprise to me, and seems to fit within the show that they've set up quite well. But yeah, ultimately I did end up addressing some issues people had, or explaining why I thought certain things weren't issues. I even brought up my own nitpicks as well, but mostly I just talked about the episode and how it made me feel and the experience that I had watching it, and why I love it so much, because that's what's important to this review, how I felt about the episode, less about other people's complaints, because if I just sit here and go through everything and debunk every complaint, then I'm not really reviewing the episode and how I felt about it. I'm just trying to refute other people's criticisms, and that's not really a good review, I don't think. Wow, that took me forever to write this script. It's easily the longest one I've ever written, but I do think that I got across basically the majority of my points, and I'm pretty proud with how this came out. But man, if I can get this edited and out by Wednesday, that would be an absolute miracle. But, I wrote that in my script, but now I'm reading it, and it's Thursday. So, hopefully this comes out today. I'm going to try my hardest, and it might end up coming out on Sunday, or at best Friday. I don't know. It's probably not going to happen. So yeah, you'll know when it comes up, because you'll be watching it if you're hearing me talk, and that would be amazing. Last week I was barely able to get my review out by Sunday. I actually couldn't finish it by 7 a.m., which I like to have it done before 7 a.m., and I like to have my videos upload early. But I got it finished closer to noon that day, and I had it publish at 2 p.m. So this is at best going to be a late night Thursday video, and probably is going to be a Sunday video. We'll see. So hopefully next week it gets easier. Even though it's also close to 80 minutes, I'm sure I won't have as much to say about it, because, it's not like The Long Night. It's not going to be a huge battle. It's just going to be an episode of the show. So I'll have my fair share of things to say about it, but hopefully it's going to be easier to do this time around. Because, I can only spend so much time making the second video of the week. I mean, damn, it just gets tiring writing so much for an episode, but it's what I chose to do, and I think it was worth it. But we'll see. If you join me next week, I'll be reviewing Season 8, Episode 4 of Game of Thrones, and on Sunday, I've got a ranking of all of the Doctor Who episodes written by Chris Chibnall, so if either of those interest you, then feel free to check them out, but that's perfectly fine if you don't. If you've stuck with me through this entire video, then you're an absolute legend. I appreciate that so much. It means the world to me, because I put a good amount of effort into making this video, but you know, thank you if you watched this whole video, or even if you just watched some of it. Thank you very much. So that's gonna do it for now, folks. I hope to see you again soon. Thank you for watching. Take care and have a lovely week.